I think every autistic individual is different and each one can have different strengths. I think we just heard Elon Musk just announced that he's Asperger's, right, on Saturday Night Live. So I would have guessed that too. So it's interesting to see who is, on the spectrum and just what their talents are. And he's got incredible talents, right?
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're joined by Cindy Lentz and Jenny Crawford from the Autism Advocate Parenting Magazine. Cindy and Jenny, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. It's so great to be on.
Now, we always like to start by getting to know who we're speaking with. So I'll pose the question to start us off, and I'll give each of you a chance to answer this question, but we'll start with Cindy. Who is Cindy Lentz?
Well, thank you for asking. I am Cindy Lentz. I'm the creative director of Autism Advocate Parenting Magazine. So that means that I oversee all of the content of the magazine, and I collaborate with all of the doctors and professionals and authors that contribute to the magazine. I have a daughter with sensory issues, so I spend a lot of time trying to find supports for her and how to best help her in her life and with her challenges. I'm a busy mom of 4 children, so they keep me on their toes. The oldest is 12, he's a boy, and then I have a daughter 10, 7, and 5. So it's busy around here, but we enjoy being together. We enjoy being in nature. I love baking and running and playing soccer and just staying busy. That's Cindy.
Great. Thanks so much, Cindy.
And then we'll turn it over to Jenny. Who is Jenny Crawford?
Sure. So I am the executive director for Autism Advocate Parenting Magazine. So what I essentially do is I oversee the entire magazine. I oversee marketing, partnerships with different organizations. I also help, and it kind of crosses over with Cindy's role a little bit, working with the editors and graphic design and just pretty much anything that I can do to help progress the magazine and get the word out there. I'm also a mom of 4 children. I have a 10-year-old boy on the spectrum. Who has absolutely changed my life and is part of the inspiration for starting this magazine. And I also have 2 neurotypical girls and a son who I just recently had. He had trisomy 18, and so I have a little boy in heaven as well. So that's a little bit about who I am.
Thanks so much, Jenny. So I guess the magic number is 4 tonight because we have 4 kids as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so similar age ranges too. So we have a 12-year-old son, 9-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, and a 4 soon to be 5-year-old son.
Yeah, it's busy.
Yes,
right?
very, very.
Never a dull moment, that's for sure.
That is true. And that's why we are having our conversation at 9:00 at night.
Right.
Oh, man. So I have to ask, did you ladies know each other before this?
Yeah, so Cindy and I have been friends for a number of years. We've kind of worked on different projects together. She used to help me with researching different things when my son was younger with autism. So I've known her for quite a while. And she also watched my son, Joseph, for a bit too.
Okay. So when did this magazine start?
So we recently launched in October 2020, but we've been working on it for probably the last year and a half, almost 2 years. But we just recently launched. It's been going well so far. We're just kind of getting traction and getting our name out there.
Okay. So, I was looking over the magazine and I love how, your mission is the primary purpose is to empower parents, help advocate, and to search out information for them, right? So I guess in so many situations, it's like you could Google and you just get overwhelmed, right? But it's nice to have that almost launching point where parents can go who are in a situation where they need your resources and it's just all right there. So I'm really helpful. I'm sure you hear that from, many parents and the feedback, right?
Yeah, honestly, and that's one of the reasons why we did this magazine. Like I myself, when Joseph was diagnosed with autism, I was completely overwhelmed. And in fact, anytime you meet any new autism parent or a parent with a child with a new diagnosis, they are completely overwhelmed because you can Google and go down the rabbit hole and you can research and research and research, and you don't even really know if the information that you're getting is credible, if you're missing information, where to start, where to go. And so this magazine just kind of brings it all together. Every topic you've ever wanted to know about autism, we cover in the magazine, and we seek out the best sources for it from around the world. So you get the most credible information, but not even just credible, expert information on the topic. So
Now, Cindy, I'm just curious now, because Jenny talked about the expertise that you're getting for the magazine.
Yeah.
Where are you finding these experts? How are you sourcing them and getting people to agree to contribute content? I know just based on us doing a podcast, how challenging it can be sometimes to get those contributions. So what's been your secret to success?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, when I'm looking for an expert, like there's so many people around that world that work with autism, but we really want the top experts in the field. So when I'm looking for someone who's an expert, I look at a few things. The first thing is their educational background. So any of their credentials, are they an MD? Are they a PhD? Like what kind of educational background do they have? The other thing that I look for a lot of the times is publications. I want to know if they're a published researcher, if they have books out there. Publications really give people their credibility. So that's definitely something I look for. But there's so many other things. Do they present at conferences nationally, internationally? How many kids at their clinic do they see each year? Do they have children of their own on the spectrum? That's very important to me as well. And kind of when you put all of those pieces together, then you can kind of get a pretty good idea if they're an expert. Now, to answer your second question, how do we get them to contribute? I feel honestly that when we reach out to a lot of these experts, they are so willing to share their information with other people. Like it has honestly just made my heart so happy that they've dedicated their lives and their careers to finding more information and helping autism families and helping people with their challenges. Most of the time, they are just willing to help. They want to get their message out there. It's been really rewarding and really nice to see.
That's great. So speaking on that then, because you have professionals that aren't just Canadian, what's your reach for the magazine?
Like what countries do we pull from?
Yeah.
A lot from the United States. A lot of the research in autism is from the US, but we have contributors from Australia, England, the Netherlands, from Zimbabwe. We really want to get an idea from around the world of what people are dealing with. And I mean, Canada's not everything and the US isn't everything. There are some really great experts from around the world, and we want to reach them and we want to bring them into our magazine so everybody has access to them.
Right. And it's a digital magazine, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, because everything I had seen was online. But so the reach for the actual magazine, it's going to all those places then, right?
Oh, yeah. Jenny actually can talk a little bit about this. We have some projects on the go to reach more people around the world. Yeah.
Yeah, one of our projects is to reach out to autism organizations in underdeveloped countries and provide the magazine for free to those organizations, especially in some of these underdeveloped countries. We're looking at Kenya right now and Zimbabwe. They just don't have the same access to the resources that we have here. And they're the ones that are really working with their child. And as we should be as parents as well. But really, that's their only resource out there. And so we want to make sure that we are getting information out there from the best experts so that they can implement those things in the home. And that's one thing that you notice with the magazine when you start to read, that it's all action-based. It's how you can take action either with your support team or yourself as a parent with your child in the home. So we're really excited about that project. And we've got a number of organizations that we're speaking to right now that are very, very eager to have the magazine go out to their community in that area.
That's great. Now, I love that you say that, because one of the notes that I had jotted down after looking through the March edition was that I just put practical. That's on the top of my paper here. So
Yeah.
I looked at, for example, the article about transitioning to adulthood, right? And that doctor, I didn't write her name down, but what she was writing, or what she wrote about, was just all the steps, like you should be having these conversations at around age 10, 11, right? Just like we would with our children. And then at the end of the article was that checklist that parents have that, they can print off, and it can be right there for them to say, okay, this is what I can go through. So again, you don't have to Google, you don't have to look, it's literally right there. So, I appreciated that just from looking through the magazine.
So when I interviewed Amy Duncan, she actually didn't give me a checklist in the beginning. And I said, Amy, I'm a checklist kind of person. Like, you got to tell me exactly what I got to do to get my child to move on, to be independent, to go off to college. And she said, it was interesting because she said, every child is different and the checklist isn't applicable to everyone. So if you just take your own child and make your own checklist, but I still said, I'm like, no, you got to give me the checklist. I'm like, some people want it. So we did include it. I'm glad that we did. I think it will benefit a lot of people.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, we also included recently in our most current issues a next steps sheet at the end of the magazine. We wanted parents to be able to read the different articles and have a piece of paper where they can write down, what inspired me, what actions do I want to take from this, what questions do I have for my support team, who do I want to reach out to based on the information that I learned, and just really what can they do with that information. And our goal with the magazine is not, read every article and do every single thing listed in the article. You as a parent, you have your own intuition, your child the best, your journey. And so read the different articles and you're going to know what resonates with you in your journey and what you think is going to be helpful to your child, and then take action on that. And so we really wanted to put that page in there to help people really understand that this is not just a passive reading magazine or passive reading material. The whole point is for you to take action and benefit your child's life.
Now, a question for both of you. Do you happen to have a favorite contribution that magazine so far?
Yeah, you go first, Jenny.
Honestly, there is so many because I read them, and of course, my favorites are the ones that my son is dealing with like right now. But I would have to say one that I quote often is Dr. Knowles, and he is right there in Brantford, Ontario. And he's a child psychologist, and he talks about the thinking traps of children with autism. And I refer to it often. My son knows them off by heart. And whenever he's sitting in a thinking trap, he'll reference back to what Dr. Knoll taught him. And so we reached out to Dr. Knoll to write about those thinking traps for the magazine, and that's probably one of my favorite because it's impacted our family so much.
I have tons of favorite ones. So as part of my job, I get to interview a lot of the authors and then ghostwrite for them. So one of my very first interviews was Robert Bernstein, and just about how we can integrate our children into a neurotypical world. And typically I set aside like 30 minutes or 45 minutes for an interview. And Robert Bernstein, he talked for 3.5 hours. And it was just like story after story after story. And I was just like sucked it all in. I was just sitting there and listening to him. He had so much insight and so much wisdom. He has worked with so many children on the spectrum for sure. It was one of my favorite conversations, which ended up being one of my favorite articles. Dr. Tom O'Brien for sure too. He wrote a really good article about the microbiome and the gluten-free, casein-free diet. But I have just so many favorite ones. I couldn't just pick one, but those are probably my top two.
And for you, I was just going to say, Cindy, it's like having your own personal seminar conference, right?
Yeah. I learned so much. It's amazing. And some of the ideas that the authors give to us, you just look at it and you're like, that makes so much sense. It's amazing that it makes so much sense. And you get really excited, like you can feel it. You get really excited to share it with everyone. You want everyone to read it and to understand it, right?
So I wanted to talk more about what your magazine focuses on. So I saw there were 4 key areas that you ladies focus on. Can you share that with us?
Sure. So the first area that we cover is expert advice. So articles from the top doctors, researchers, and professionals from literally around the world. We also have current autism research, which Cindy can talk more about. She is excellent at it. She searches out current research, and then she picks out key articles that would be applicable to the parent population. She summarizes it, and then we send it to the researchers for review. And I'm going to brag about Cindy here, but the researchers, a lot of them respond and say that our review has been the most accurate review of their research than any other publication. So Cindy has a great science background and does a great job at that. We also have printable resources. So anything that you can think of, we love to create for autism parents so that they don't have to spend the time creating it. And I think that stemmed from me having to create all my own supports when my son was little, that now we just create everything. And we also don't have a lot of red tape in the magazine. So if anybody writes in and says they want a resource, we put it on the list as long as it serves everybody, and we'll make that a part of our magazine. And then we have stories of hope and inspiration from parent advocates as well as self-advocates, as well as self-advocates. And we've got a lot more coming too. We've got some nutrition articles coming, and we've got a holistic side to the magazine coming, and some parent life pieces coming. So we're really excited for what we have planned for the end of the year and what we'll be starting.
So for you ladies, your journey has now been 10 plus years, right? As parents of a child who has autism. When did you first get that diagnosis?
So I first got the diagnosis for Joseph when he was probably around 7. I actually knew very early on, probably around 2.5, 3 years old, but I was very hesitant to having him labeled. So unfortunately, I would see a lot of different practitioners and doctors and individuals that would support him on the different areas that he needed, until one day I realized that it was okay to have him diagnosed, and that I really would serve him better as his mom and his support team if everybody was on the same page and he had that diagnosis. So I went through the process, actually through Dr. Knoll, to have him assessed, and then he was labeled with Asperger's, which is incorporated into autism. So that's when he was first diagnosed.
And Cindy?
So my daughter, she doesn't actually have autism,
right.
But she has a lot of sensory processing issues, which overlaps with the autism community, I would say. But we knew right when she was little that she always had some sensory processing issues. I never had a label for it, and I didn't know what it was, but really picky eating, oversensitive to sound. She didn't like people touching her. Like her friends couldn't even hug her or give her high fives. Like she didn't have anything to do with sensory things. So we always knew there was something going on, but it wasn't until recently that we, like Jenny said, until we labeled it and we put a name to it and said, now that we know what it is, we can try and find some help with. So same as Jenny, what she says with Dr. Knowles is her favorite articles, but whenever I see a sensory article or a feeding article or a toilet training, like I just like soak it all up. I love it for my own personal reasons, right? So that's my daughter.
And I mean, I think that's for any parent, right? When you're in a situation, when you're going through that potty training, even, you want all the information to help you get through that stage, right?
Yes.
And, I'm sure, like you said, Jenny, especially as a first-time mom, you see something, but then to move forward, to actually go and, potentially get a diagnosis, right? I think, even when I was working at Children's Aid, you would see people didn't necessarily want to go that next step, even though when you would talk to them, they would say, I knew something was going on, something was maybe different, however they would describe it, right? But it's just almost that confirmation. But then also to know after the diagnosis came that there's, so many resources, now even more with the magazine for people, right? But it's not the end per se, right? Mm-hmm. So Jenny, did you have a time after you did get that confirmation where, as a mom, you almost went through a little bit of a grieving process, or how did you process that diagnosis?
Well, I did know that he had autism for a long time, but I don't think you're ever prepared for the official word that your child does have autism. And so, yeah, I do remember grieving when we found out, or when he was labeled, but we got over it quite quickly. I'm very much about action, and I had been in action for a long time before. I actually had quit my job. I used to be an HR director in Toronto for a company over North America. And when I had found out that he had autism, I suspected it. I quit my job and made it my job to stay at home with him and work with him a lot. So I was very used to action. But again, when you first get that diagnosis, it is a little bit of a shock because you're like, actually, this is real. It's not just, what I've been thinking and helping my son with all along. And you see that with a lot of new parents with a child on the spectrum. I remember my friend reached out to me and her son was just diagnosed and she was really distraught about it. And in fact, actually that weekend, a group of us girls were heading out to the Milestones Autism Conference in Ohio. And so we invited her to come. It might have been a little bit early because he was just diagnosed. So it was really actually hard for her to be at that conference and to learn so much when she had just gone through that process. So I really identify with a lot of parents just receiving that for the first time because it can be quite tough.
Now, in terms of, I'm just curious if there's anything that and I guess maybe I should kind of give some context here before I pose the question, but just knowing an individual, an adult with Asperger's, one thing I've known about him, and I didn't know, he actually told me that this was the case. He's someone who's super focused. So he's been able to channel it. And I'm sure it affects different people differently. And he's been very successful just in his career. He's really young. He's been successful investing money, extremely successful, actually. Is there anything that you kind of notice as a strength that maybe wouldn't be something that you would see if it wasn't for the diagnosis?
Yeah, I think every autistic child is very different or individual. So you always want to look for their strengths and where they excel and where they're really good. For my son, I can see different strengths, but he's still really young. So we're kind of exploring his different interests to see kind of where they lie. It was actually going through my son's diagnosis that we realized that my husband was on the spectrum. So I could speak to, and it would be considered high functioning Asperger's. He's an engineer. And you'll actually find a lot of engineers tend to be on the spectrum. I'm not saying all engineers, but many. And I can talk to some of his strengths. He is a speed reader and he sees everything in pictures. So he can problem solve things very, very well because he doesn't see necessarily words. He sees pictures and processes and images in his mind. In fact, I think Temple Grandin described that for herself as well. Is that right, Cindy?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Did she describe that in her interview recently?
I think just on conferences and videos, not in her interview, no.
Okay. And he's really quick, like with technology. My husband, that's one of his strengths. I'm not. So I just make him do everything with technology for me. So those are some of his strengths. He's got a lot of other strengths as well, but he's had a lot of struggles too throughout his growing up. And when we went through the diagnosis with my son, and I'm kind of going off in a different area here, it was when we realized that a lot of things that my husband did when he was little, our son Joseph does, or so we understand. So I think to answer your question, I think every autistic individual is different and each one can have different strengths. I think we just heard Elon Musk just announced that he's Asperger's, right, on Saturday Night Live. So I would have guessed that too. So it's interesting to see who is, on the spectrum and just what their talents are. And he's got incredible talents, right?
One of our parent advocates, when I was interviewing her for an article, she told me about her son, and he wasn't able to read yet, and he would have all of these letter blocks. You just play with those blocks that have the letters on each side, and they would be watching the movie credit. And at the end of the movie, he would study the credits. And then by the time the credits were done, he had like 100 words all written out with the blocks. He didn't know what they said. He didn't know how to read, but he I guess it must be a visual learner as well to be able to see the letters, put them in order. And he had all the credits laid out with all of his blocks. And the mom was just like, what? This is crazy, right? Wow. And I also watched a recent YouTube video. Maybe you've seen it. I can't remember the dad's name, but he was really shy about putting his son on YouTube. But he said, my son has autism. He was recently diagnosed, and you have to see his amazing strength. And he would ask his son, he said, January 5th, 1981. And the son could tell you what day of the week it was. And he just did it back to like the 1800s and 1700s. And he would give his son a date and he would tell you what day of the week it was. He's like, this is amazing. He's like, it's so crazy how their minds work and how they can see and process information. It's amazing. It is. And that's the thing, right? There's
strengths to be had. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, right? Even if there's a diagnosis or not. So that right there, it's a good example. Now, okay, going back to your husband, and even I'm just thinking like age group and age differences. Are you able to speak on, back in the 80s, diagnoses as prevalent as they are today? Are you able to talk on that?
Well, I was a child back then, so I don't know. However, I do know that it wasn't really a thing back then. Like not too much. In fact, at the Milestones conference I did go to, I don't know, several years ago, I met another individual who had an adult on the spectrum, and she was telling me that I think her son would have been born in the 70s. She's like, it wasn't even a thing to be acknowledged. So she still goes to the conferences for whatever resources she can get for her adult autistic child. But no, it wasn't really well known or explored then, or even diagnosed. You were just considered, for some of those that were Asperger's, just really smart. Like my husband was taken out of class and put in a computer class, a gifted class, because of how well he did. But then in a regular classroom situation, he would melt down or get in trouble and have to write out words like on a chalkboard, if he misbehaved. And so I don't think it was really, I guess, diagnosed as much back then.
I think, unfortunately, too, a lot of children who had really high struggles or really big challenges were probably institutionalized too. I think there was a lot more of that.
Yeah, I think it's almost like if you had Asperger's or what's considered higher functioning autism, which we don't like to use that label anymore, but you would probably be put in more of a gifted capacity. And then those that maybe were nonverbal or had a lot of struggles, like Cindy said, might have been institutionalized or put into special classes. So I'm not really sure that they knew the full extent of autism back then.
You just led me to think of something else. So the school piece, do you ladies talk about that in the magazine and just different resources, I guess, that parents can look at when dealing with the school boards?
Yeah. So I'll let Cindy answer this question, actually, because she deals with the authors of the school pieces.
Yeah, a couple of the really big ones that we've had relate to IEPs. So when your child has autism, generally you have some kind of specialized education, and it requires you to create an IEP or an individual education program for your child. And these programs I think it's so hard for parents. It can be really big struggle, really overwhelming for you to learn the lingo of the education system, to learn the process, and you're just kind of thrown in there. So we've had some really big authors. Catherine Witcher just wrote for us, and Mary Jo O'Neill on IEPs, on just how to create a successful IEP, how to get your child integrated into the school system, how to advocate for your children at school. Really valuable advice for that. And then there's a couple of other articles too on homeschooling, on how to teach your children from home, on successful methods there, and how to integrate into the classroom, how to get your children prepared to be in the classroom, some strategies that they can have to be more successful. So definitely that's a big focus for us, because that's a hard thing for parents to juggle the school system and to advocate for your child and finding common ground with teachers and administrators. That's a really big challenge for a lot of families.
And not only that, remote learning as well. Now that we're in kind of the COVID area, we had an article on that, which I thought was pretty impressive.
I just thought of that because, I have a few friends who are teachers, and, one was saying the other day, like, I worry so much about one of the students in my class who is autistic, nonverbal. And it's like, what's happening with that child, right? Who knows? Maybe there's other siblings in the house and parents are overwhelmed with just dealing with them in remote learning, right? So there's so many other aspects to it. So that's really great that you guys cover that part of the academic piece, because it can be overwhelming.
For sure.
Yeah, sure, it can be overwhelming in the best of scenarios, especially if you have a larger family and you still have to work and everything and try to juggle the online stuff. Yeah, there's a ton of challenges there. Actually, I have a question for you, Jenny. Going back to when you realized that Joseph, that there was something that you suspected that maybe he did have autism. You said it was around the time he was 2.5, 3 years old. Knowing what you know now, it being, several years later, if you could go back and give yourself some advice, what would you tell yourself, when he was 2.5 years old?
I would probably go back and tell myself that it's okay to have a diagnosis and to bring everybody in on the same page, and it would be in his best interest. I don't think I would change quitting my job and working with him. That was like the biggest thing that helped him progress, in my belief. I would tell myself to give myself more grace, because I put a lot of pressure on myself, especially because you go to those early year centers and you get the milestones and you see where your child's supposed to be at and where they're not at, and then you want to make sure they're getting there. And so I was kind of creating activities to help him reach those milestones, and I put a lot of pressure on myself and would spend all day playing with him and all night researching into autism. So I'd probably give myself some more grace and just tell myself that it's going to be okay. Things are going to get better, and that I can help him and work with him in his behaviors to help him have a successful life, and just to really believe in myself and to believe in him. And I would say just not to put so much pressure on myself, and to really enjoy the journey, like really enjoy every moment with him. And I really tried to do that, especially when he was younger, definitely now. But there were times where my desire to help him progress got in the way of enjoying the moment. So that's probably what I would go back and give advice to myself.
Awesome. Now, and kind of for both of you, in speaking about the journey, I actually want to kind of shift focus and talk about the magazine a little bit more. What was that whole process? You two coming together and, deciding that you were going to take on this endeavor, get it online. Can you kind of fill us in on that, some of the behind the scenes stuff?
Sure. So when Joseph was little, I used to reach out to Cindy to try to research as much as possible things for me in regards to autism that I wanted to know that I didn't have time for. Like working with my son a lot. And then in order to be able to stay at home with my son, I had to kind of work on the side at home later on in the evenings. And so I just really didn't have a second to spare. So Cindy was incredible at that. And so it was very easy to reach out to Cindy and talk more about this magazine. And she was well versed with autism, and she has a science background as well. So she was perfect for it, and for a partnership for us to work together. I also was in contact with other parent advocates that were interested in the same things that I was, which was, who are the best experts out there and what information can we learn from them? Besides our local information or resources we get for occupational therapy, for some people it's ABA, speech therapy, and things like that. I want to know what the best doctors in the world have to say, because my son deserves the best. And unfortunately, I can't fly around the world and go ask them all my questions and take all my time doing that, or their time. We thought that the magazine would be a best way to gain that information and insight, and then make it available to the parent population. And so I wouldn't have been able to take on something like this early on with Joseph. It wasn't until I worked with him for a number of years, and it was something that was in the back of my mind, thinking, I just wish there was a resource out there that I could just pick up and just get the information that I need. And so now that, Joseph's thriving, he's doing very, very well, I was able to kind of take this on, and there's a whole kind of group of us. We've got a parent advocate advisory board with a number of parents. There's grandparents. They all have a child on the spectrum or on the spectrum themselves. We have, Cindy, who is our creative director. We have editors, we have graphic designers, and a lot of people are volunteer with this magazine. And we really just try to get that information out to help parents. So it really kind of started from a selfish desire of wanting to know all this information. But then, of course, you're going to share it with the rest of the parent population so that they can benefit as well. And I always kind of relate it to, if there's something, so I worked in human resources, and in a benefits package, there's something called best doctors. So for example, if you were to get a terminal disease, if you were to get cancer or something like that, if you have a benefits package that has a best doctors clause in it, you can have the best doctors in the world review your case. And that was always kind of in the back of my mind that if anything were to happen to me or my family, or we went through, a medical issue or had something that we needed help with, I would search out the best people in the world. Why not? Of course you want that for yourself, for your family. And so that was always in the back of my mind with my son. Why would I just only rely on local resources? I want to know who the doctor is that specializes in genetics and sees 3,500 autistic kids a year rather than the local pediatrician that sees, a couple autistic kids a year. I want to know what they have to say and what insight they have that can directly affect my son. And there's a lot of parents that are like that and who are active and engaged parents that want that information so that they can go home and do the necessary things or implement the necessary things to help their child. So that's a little bit of the behind the scenes of how it got started.
So it sounds like you really built a community as well.
Yeah, definitely. We've got, I would say it's a great community. We've been even collaborating with a lot of different autism organizations, professionals, just in marketing the magazine and getting together and learning what resources they have and what they're doing to benefit the autistic community. So it just grows by the week, the different associations and partnerships that we create with just even different organizations that are helping.
That's great. Well, ladies, I had all my questions answered tonight and even more. And it was nice to get to know you ladies more, the faces, I guess, the brains behind what this magazine is all about and the goals and the vision that you have for it. So obviously you're on the internet. We can Google you, Autism Advocate Parenting Magazine. Where else can we find you online?
You can find us on Instagram. It's Autism Advocate Parenting Mag. We're typically on there. We do a lot of IGTV interviews. We do a lot of posts on there, stories and different things like that. We're not as involved with Facebook, but it's probably mostly Instagram. We're also starting to get a little bit on board with Clubhouse. So sometimes we'll host. So we're getting to the point of hosting rooms in Clubhouse, so where you can actually come and ask all your questions, and we'll lead you to the doctors and the professionals in those certain areas of expertise. And then, of course, like you said, you can Google and find our magazine. We're at www.autismadvocateparentingmagazine.com.
And it's monthly that you have an edition come out, right?
Yes, yeah, it's a monthly digital issue.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, for joining us tonight.
All right, thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us. It's nice to meet you guys.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.